Bramblewood, a typical modern housing development, the estate agent would say, convenient to the railway station. For 50 years, that convenience was appreciated by travellers, for before the houses came, this was the junction for the Southwold Railway and its 3-foot gauge trains. With few industries or large towns, railways were slow in coming to much of East Anglia. The East Suffolk Main Line ran from Ipswich in a more or less northeasterly direction to the rising fishing ports and seaside resorts of Lowestoft and finally to Yarmouth. To the dismay of coastal communities such as Southwold, the line ran some 10 miles inland for much of the distance. Two men fought to put Southwold on the railway map. The best known was Richard C. Rapier, whose firm, Ransomes and Rapier, sent railway products across the globe from their waterside works in Ipswich. Rapier was always keen to develop new markets, at home or abroad. The company sent the first engine out to China in 1875 for the Wusong Tram Road near Shanghai. It met a bizarre fate. For the Mandarins, fearful of the influence of foreign devils, threw a bound coolie in front of the tiny engine. In the resultant riots, the line was broken up, and the driver, William Jackson, fled for his life. Rapier enthralled East Anglian audiences with tales of China and of what his narrow gauge could do, for he was proposing just such a line for Southwold. The Southwold Railway Company was incorporated in 1876. When local fundraising efforts faltered, Rapier became chairman, a post he was to hold until his death 20 years later. Rapier's colleague in promoting the line was Arthur Payne. He became engineer and selected a route south of the River Blythe for most of the journey, which necessitated a swing bridge near Southwold itself. Wearing a second hat as manager, Payne had to recruit staff when the opening drew close. The recipient of this letter was to give a lifetime of service to the company. The diminutive trains soon became a local institution and were well patronised, even though services were sparse, as this 1879 timetable recalls. Halesworth was the junction with the Great Eastern. For many years, mainline trains were in the capable hands of Claude Hamilton 440s. The East Suffolk line remains open, and these severe but imposing Georgian buildings have stood on the down platform for more than 130 years. Until 1888, platform length was curtailed by a level crossing. Movable platforms, which doubled as gates, were the answer, and served until 1922, when new equipment came from Bolton and Paul of Ipswich, a firm better known for the wartime Defiant fighter. The level crossing has been replaced by an overbridge now, but the movable platforms survived through the 1980s. Freight transfer was the Achilles heel of the narrow gauge. A tranship shed adjoined the Great Eastern platforms. The access road to the Bramblewood estate now occupies the site. Minerals were handled in exchange sidings south of the station. Southwold trains connected with the main line services. In the final years, through passengers were likely to encounter number 4, Wen Haston, the newest and most powerful engine on the line. Built to cope with the expected harbour branch traffic in 1914, she was initially judged too large and clumsy, but by the late 20s, with numbers 1 and 2 in dire need of overhaul, she proved her worth. When filmed in April 1929, just days before closure, she still carried her original dark green paintwork. Coal was still being transshipped at the 11th hour. In the 1890s, the Great Eastern had considered buying the Southwold Railway, and a detailed report was prepared with numerous drawings. Halesworth was the largest station, due to the tranship facilities. These included coal sheds, a great rarity. Was the company so fearful of the descendants of the smugglers of olden times that coal had to be kept under cover, or was it exceptional fastidiousness? It is time to board the narrow-gauge train for the 40-minute run out to Southwold. The embankment just outside the station survives despite redevelopment, as does one of the bridge abutments on the Southwold Road. A wood and asbestos engine shed was provided just outside the station in 1914 to house the 4th locomotive.
All tickets, please.
A level crossing over the Blyford Road provided the obvious site for the first intermediate station, Wenhaston. It was the only public road crossing on the line. Number 1 was absolutely spotless back in 1900. The approach to Blytheborough was dominated by the massive Holy Trinity Church and adjacent ruined priory, a reminder of former glories. The Great Eastern Survey predated the conversion of the siding at Blytheborough into a loop. Often spoken of as Blyborough by local people, the station had altered little between the Great Eastern Survey and this 1900 portrait. The wooden building on the left is the goods shed. Travel on the Southwold was leisurely, as engines paused to shunt wagons en route. By 1989, the coal shed at Blyborough was the last surviving Southwold Railway building. They called it the ceremony of the keys, handing over the train staffs. On a single line, trains could meet head-on between stations. To avoid this, a line is split into sections, each with its unique train staff. The staff being handed to the driver, and shown in the box, is between Blyborough and Southwold. This train has already come from Halesworth, so as well as receiving the staff for the next section, the driver surrenders the staff for the section in rear. Often these staffs unlocked points en route, hence the key on the Halesworth token. Staffs were differently shaped and clearly lettered to avoid confusion. On most railways, staff working was in the hands of the signalman, but on the Southwold, where there were no signal boxes, this duty was carried out by the station masters instead. In this animation, the Halesworth Blyborough token, coloured yellow, is given to the driver who leaves for Blyborough, where he surrenders the staff, receiving the Southwold token in order to complete his journey. At Southwold, he surrenders this staff. If trains travel in alternate directions, this simple system suffices, but if a second train is to leave Halesworth before the first has returned, it breaks down, for the staff is at Blyborough. The train ticket system was the answer. The driver is given a ticket as his authority to proceed after seeing the staff. In our second animation, the driver is shown the Halesworth Blyborough staff, but given a ticket. He runs to Blyborough, where he gives up this ticket and takes the staff on to Southwold. The ticket is cancelled. The second train is now ready to leave Halesworth on the staff and arrives at Blyborough. It can go no further until the train at Southwold has returned to Blyborough with the token for that section. The staffs are then exchanged and the trains proceed on their way. When the harbour branch opened in 1914, Walberswick became another staff post as the nearest station to the junction. There were now 3 sections, and a new Blytheborough-Walberswick token was introduced. Few trains used the harbour branch, and the line reverted to 2 sections, but the newest staff survived, as did the older staffs to go into the Southwold Museum. Resuming our journey at Blytheborough, the line skirts the south bank of the River Blythe, with lovely river and woodland scenes as we near the Heronry. The company used this evocative photograph of number 3 Blythe at the Heronry for publicity purposes in Edwardian days. Beyond the heronry, the line traversed sandy heathland. Our impression of the old narrow-gauge railways is of impecunious little concerns, with weed-grown track, peeling paint, and a general air of decay. The Southwold Railway was often hard up, and in the end just ran out of money, and so put up the shutters. But even in its last week of operation, it was still in excellent condition. Even by Southwold standards, Walberswick Station was tiny. Nonetheless, it appeared on the Great Eastern Survey. Originally, the line crossed the River Blythe on a bowstring girder bridge just beyond Walberswick. A stronger bridge was installed in 1908 when conversion to standard gauge was considered. East of the bridge was the junction with the harbour branch. The line then crossed Wood End Marshes, a low-lying area prone to flooding. In 1897, trains had to terminate at Walberswick and passengers continued by boat. The most impressive earthwork was the cutting, as it was known, across Southwold Common. A footbridge for the benefit of Southwold Golf Club spanned the cutting. Journey's End, as recorded by local photographer Mr. Barrett Jenkins in 1929. Delightful bidirectional signals were provided, worked from the post rather than a lever frame. As the sands of time ran out for the line, Mr. Barrett Jenkins captured number 4 when Haston, arriving at Southwold Station. At train time, the little station became a hive of activity, with passengers scurrying after their luggage, greeting old friends or saying goodbye to new ones. The station bus, scarcely bigger than the average taxicab, would be there to meet the trains. There would be parcels to unload, and just like the main line railways, these had to be checked against the waybills. Some would be to collect, others would be for onward delivery by road. The road transport was no more modern than the little trains themselves. Wagons had to be shunted, even though closure was but days away. Naturally, the Great Eastern had surveyed Southwold Station. They even included detailed plans of the buildings, which were timber-framed with brick infilling, sometimes called noggin. They survived until 1968. Once the passengers had gone, peace and quiet descended once again. For the staff, it was a brief lull before more work. Mr. Barrett Jenkins chose one of those lulls to record some of the staff for posterity. Railwaymen have always worked to a demanding set of rules, and on the Southwold it was no different. When driver John Stannard was shunting at Southwold in the busy days before World War I, Station Master Fitzhugh came out of his office to keep an eye on things, for Rule 21 said he was to give personal attention to the shunting of trains. The company rulebook was a pocket-sized volume running to 42 pages. According to Rule 2, it had to be carried at all times. Draconian punishments awaited drivers who speeded. A series of rules applied to the swing bridge. Openings were to be supervised by the Southwold station master. It was an involved task, but seldom required. Just once, in fact, between 1879 and 1894. The line operated under a Board of Trade order, so there were more conditions and regulations to know. 3 240 tank engines came from Sharp Stewart for the opening in 1879. They came on HP, but money was tight, and No. 1 Southwold was returned to the makers in 1883 for resale. Her sisters, No. 2 Halesworth and No. 3 Blythe, had to cope with all traffic for the next decade. Blythe remained in use to the end. It seems that hand coaling meant just that, with coal being selected lump by lump and then carried bucket by bucket to the engine for loading. A laborious job. A new No. 1, also named Southwold, came in 1893. She was a 242 tank. Loco foreman William Jackson, once of the Woosung tramroad, is on the footplate on this occasion. Jackson was a flamboyant figure and a born raconteur. His home, Shanghai Cottage, was the scene of colourful parties, with Jackson and his wife in oriental costume. By 1928, No. 1 needed boiler repairs, but there was no money, and when the line closed, she was cut up. The last engine, No. 4 Wenhaston, shunts at Southwold just before closure. In 1925, the board sought to sell her to raise money for other improvements, but there were no takers, and she was to become the mainstay of services later on. She was just 15 years old and still with a low mileage and years of potential life ahead of her when the railway closed down. By 1900, the East Coast fisheries were booming, and ports such as Lowestoft and Yarmouth overtaxed. Southwold sought its share of trade with harbour improvements from 1906. The lack of direct rail access to the quays was inconvenient, and a light railway order was obtained in 1913, and the Mile Long Harbour branch opened the following year. The branch diverged from the main line east of the Swing Bridge. This sequence from 1929 is the only known view of the junction and its short loop track. The sharply curved formation, which swung away from the main line, is still visible today. Near the quay, the line crossed a small watercourse. A short length of track escaped the scrapmen and has defied erosion and flood for more than 60 years. One of the rare single-post buffer stops has also survived. It is a poignant reminder of fate, for no sooner was the branch opened than World War I, and then motor competition made it useless. Passengers travelled in Clemenson six-wheel carriages. When new, they had attractive beading and open-end platforms. Between 1919 and 1923, all six were rebuilt with flush sides and enclosed ends. No. 4 was the last to be altered. The Clemenson flexible wheelbase was an alternative to the bogie system. The centre truck slid sideways on greased bearings and was connected to the radial outer trucks by pivoted joints. No illustrations are known of the Southwold underframes, so we are depicting similar equipment from the Manx Northern Railway. A pair of four-wheeled luggage vans came in 1885. Other four-wheeled stock included two drop-side opens. Coal was conveyed in Clemenson six-wheel wagons, such as No. 34. A figure of 8 link replaced the usual narrow-gauge chopper hook, following a breakaway in 1921. It will soon be time to join our train, but No. 2 will never journey to Halesworth again. The boldly lettered private owner coal wagons of Thomas Moy supplemented the railway company's 4- and 6-wheel wagons. As word of the impending closure spread, a Gaumont newsreel cameraman arrived. Thanks to Mr. Stretton Ward, he too became a part of the scene, as No. 4 was used to pull out No. 3 past Nos. 1 and 2. Parcels and luggage traffic remained heavy. The buses were less accommodating. Number 4 had a certain amount of shunting to do. For years it had been so, as this flashback to Edwardian times tells us. The large beer vat must have been quite a load for the little trains. A great adventure for a tiny tot. In the early days of railways, train departure was often announced by ringing a handbell. The tradition lasted on the Southwold up to the end. It is over 60 years since the little trains last ran. The years have thinned the ranks of those who could recall the railway at first hand. David Lee, secretary of the Southwold Museum, is one of that band. His clearest recollection was
sitting on, presumably, my mother's knee in one of the Southwold carriages at Halesworth, waiting for the train to start, looking out through a window at the rear, or the door at the rear if it was open, and it was tipping down with rain. I must have travelled it several times between 1923 and 1929, because my father had a property here.
As we look at these scenes of what is no more, we might pause for a moment. Had the Southwold Railway survived, like the Festiniog or the Talyllyn railways, to the end of World War II, then perhaps we might be making this trip today. Alas, it was not to be, and trains no longer skirt the banks of the Blythe. Number 4 had more work to perform at Blytheborough on the return journey. In the background is the coal shed. The open saloon carriages were ideal for organised parties. Near Halesworth, the line ran alongside the Great Eastern briefly, then swung away to cross the main road and enter the station yard. As passengers and staff go about their business, we can ask what went wrong, why did it close down, and what is left today. Railways like the Southwold were a product of their own time. They could survive in Victorian or Edwardian days, as we shall see, but when far-reaching changes came, they were too vulnerable. Even in Victorian days, the Southwold Railway was seen as a delightful curiosity.
No line is more punctual than the GER, and having journeyed from London to Halesworth at express speed, One is tempted to wonder, when aboard the miniature train bound for Southwold, whether the officials are not afraid of breaking their toy locomotive. So cautiously do they proceed along the funny little metals.
The railway's heyday was in Edwardian times. There was money for improvements to the stations, even for a rudimentary carriage shed at Southwold. National as well as local events impinged upon life. As with all small railways, the line developed a folklore, brilliantly portrayed in a series of postcards produced by the artist Reg Carter. Nowadays, the cards are prized as collector's items. Improvements continued into the 20s, but problems were mounting. Road competition began to eat into traffic and the bank balance fell. By 1928, the company was desperate for help. Appeals to the LNER and to Southwold Council went unheeded. Locomotive repairs had to be deferred. Competition mounted. Debenture interest could not be met. The final curtain was about. Company Secretary Ward came down from the London offices for a final visit prior to closure, which was set for the 11th of April 1929. Station Master Girling could still manage a smile, but his bell ringing was sombre. The poster boards of the mainline companies had to be sent back to Halesworth before the closure. Some of the staff gathered with Station Master Girling for a farewell photo. On the right, and holding his camera, is Mr. Barrett Jenkins. His film record, with that of Mr. Stretton Ward, made this programme possible. The little trains ran no more, but the stories rolled on. The line lay abandoned. A party of enthusiasts were allowed to push Blythe out of Halesworth's shed for farewell photos in the mid-30s. Wartime demands for scrap saw locos and track fed to the hungry furnaces. Long after the war, Southwold Station was demolished to make way for a police station and a fire station. The cutting became a public footpath leading to the bridge. The swing bridge had been blown up as an invasion precaution, and a replacement footbridge on the old columns provides the only direct access to Walberswick. A fascinating display of artefacts appears in the Southwold Museum, including the cash bag from Walberswick. The bells, so much a part of ritual at train departure, are also on display. Some of the company's reinforced concrete fence posts survive in situ. A commemorative plaque was affixed to Southwold Police Station in centenary year 1979. The railway ran for 50 years. Liquidation has already lasted over 60 years due to legal problems. Through land sales at Southwold and Halesworth, shareholders may even receive some money back. But let us leave the railway in happier days with this enchanting smile amidst the bustle of train time.